Welcome to Chax Poetry Talks, a podcast brought to you by Chax Press. This is Charles Alexander. I'm your host and speaker. You can find Chax Press online at chax.org. And now, the podcast. Last time I spoke a little bit about some very powerful poetry, even terrifying poetry, by William Blake. I'm moving back to the side of the Atlantic on which I live, to America, to an equally powerful poet, and one that, for some reason, doesn't have such a public recognition that would include that word power or that word terrible, and terrible in the sense of terrifying, of able to encompass terror even. But I think she is, and that is, I'm talking about Emily Dickinson. I've lectured on Dickinson, written about Dickinson, talked Dickinson multiple times, published work on Dickinson, and I'm interested in not repeating myself. So to begin, I opened two editions of Dickinson at random. I don't know if that's possible to open a book just at random. Maybe we have centers of books we go to, parts of books we go to. But they are the two major editions of Dickinson's work that came out in the 20th century. That is the 1955, first published 1955 edition, edited by Thomas H. Johnson, and I'm not quite sure of the year, but the later edition edited by R.W. Franklin. I believe it was first published in 1998. Is that possible? I don't think that is possible. Sorry about that. I should have my editions straight by now. But anyway, it is later than the Johnson edition, and probably more accurate in terms of the chronology of the poems and the text of the poems. However, both of these books that I have are readers' editions, which means, for one thing, they publish simply one version of each of these poems in a typeset state with some regular formatting that is still different than the manuscript poems that Dickinson left us. The fascinating handwriting, spacing, dashes, extra words and marks off to the side, which Dickinson left and probably did not want anyone to even ever see, after having only published, a handful of poems in her lifetime, and being extremely private about her poetry, except to her friends who she addressed in poems and who she addressed in letters and wrote voluminous letters and wrote poems in the letters, and some would say that some of the letters rise to the quality of poems. I don't know if that's quite right. That implies that I think poems are higher than prose, and I don't necessarily think so. But Dickinson is, in some ways, still an enigma to many. The more we do know about her, we don't know everything. Anyway, so I opened these two books to more or less central pages. I have to be careful every time I open my Johnson edition. I bought it in 1976 in London, the British version of that edition, and believe me, it is falling apart by now, but I can't bear to part with it. So the poem I opened to, or the actually 4 or 5 poems I opened to in that edition, I'll read one of them. And one of the reasons I'm opening these just anywhere is to show how you can open anywhere in Dickinson and find something of wonder, something that seems an incredible poem, and also often something that's just absolutely delightful. We'll get to the power and the terror later too, but right now I'm looking at one that I would characterize as delightful, and it is in the Johnson edition, poem 755. No bobolink reverse his singing when the only tree ever he minded occupying by the farmer be clove to the root, his spacious future, best horizon, gone, whose music be his only anodyne, brave bobolink. Well, maybe I should take back what I said before, because this is a fairly powerful poem, almost from the point of view of a bird whose favorite tree has been destroyed. And that music now is the only anodyne, which I take to be the only health-giving, the only, in a way, an antidote to the world. Let's listen to that once more. Where I pause, there are often in Dickinson a space and a long dash. I happen to prefer the Johnson edition's use of end dashes regularly rather than the Franklin's use of a single hyphen. Of course, if you see the manuscripts, which you can see online, look for the Emily Dickinson manuscripts online, and you will find a treasure trove. But again, the poem. No bobolink reverse his singing when the only tree ever he minded occupying by the farmer be clove to the root, his spacious future, best horizon, gone, whose music be his only anodyne, brave bobolink. It's kind of a fascinating use of the pronoun he, his, and his, which I take it to refer to the bobolink, his singing, and the only tree he ever minded occupying, which is interesting how that minded. I don't think it minded as though being opposed to occupying. Rather, he minded the tree and he occupied the tree. But the later, that his spacious future, his only anodyne, seems to be a little more generalized. It could even include the farmer without that tree, or in some way us, when something that defined a space for us is gone. Now the spacious future, best horizon, gone. Whose music? The bobolink's music. Any music of that natural world be his only anodyne, or perhaps ours. Okay, I want to look in then at the page I opened. By the way, that was page 370 in the Thomas H. Johnson Dickinson book. The edition I opened in, page to which I opened in the Franklin edition are pages 350 and 351. And the poem here I know a little better, so I will read it. And it's just a little bit longer than the past one. Almost all of Dickinson's poems are, well under a page. And in these 2 pages right here, there are 4 complete poems and just a couple of lines on the next page of one. But poem 788, as numbered by Franklin. Publication is the auction of the mind of man. Poverty be justifying for so foul a thing. Possibly, but we would rather from our garret go white unto the white Creator than invest our snow. Thought belong to him who gave it, then to him who bare its corporeal illustration, sell the royal air in the parcel. Be the merchant of the heavenly grace, but reduce no human spirit to disgrace of price. Well, if you ever wanted an answer to why she did not publish work in her lifetime, why she did not value either fame in the human world or possibly commerce, and meaning economic commerce of her work in the human world, there it is. Publication is the auction of the mind of man. Poverty be justifying for so foul a thing. Possibly, but we would rather from our garret go white unto the white Creator than invest our snow. Thought belong to him who gave it, then to him who bare its corporeal illustration, sell the royal air in the parcel, be the merchant of the heavenly race, but reduce no human spirit to disgrace of price. So one's very breath, one's thought, belongs more to some greater purpose, some him who gave it to us, some heavenly grace, than it belongs to anything as dizzyingly banal as fame and such readers. Okay, I want to find just one more poem of Dickinson's to give some example of that power that I mentioned. And for that, I'm going to look at poem number 764. And I will read it from the Franklin edition, because that's, again, a little easier for me to deal with than my book whose cover is gone and whose spine is about to come apart. And this is a poem that when I was barely out of my teens, maybe early 20s, my attention was called to by, I think, the Dickinson scholar, Sharon Cameron, and not too long after that by the brilliant poet Susan Howe, who has had a lot to say about Dickinson over the years. And if you think of Dickinson as a retiring spinsterish loner and weak in any way, I would say this would be one poem you might point to for a quite different vision than that unfortunate stereotype, which was probably never true for a woman who lived in Western Massachusetts near the frontier, probably knew how to use a flintlock rifle and knew how to take care of tools and a house in times that were quite difficult. My life had stood a loaded gun in corners till a day the owner passed, identified, and carried me away. And now we roam in sovereign woods, and now we hunt the doe, and every time I speak for him, the mountains straight reply. And do I smile, such cordial light upon the valley glow, it is as a Vesuvian face had let its pleasure through. And when at night, our good day done, I guard my master's head, 'tis better than the eider duck's deep pillow to have shared. To foe of his, I'm deadly foe, none stir the second time, on whom I lay a yellow eye or an emphatic thumb. Though I than he may longer live, he longer must than I. For I have but the power to kill, without the power to die. My life had stood a loaded gun, the self as a powerful instrument, carried away by a master and owner, roaming the woods, hunting, the sheer joy of going through the mountains. And when there is a smile, it is as though Vesuvius, the mountain, had overflowed into the valley. And if that's not a sexual image, I'm not sure what is. And then also this unresolved, and I love unresolved endings in general, but this is one of my favorites. The inability to die. Though I than he may longer live, he longer must than I. And he must because as this gun, but also as this force of a lover, I have but the power to kill without the power to die. Okay, that's a much more complicated poem than I probably conveyed there, but I'm going to leave it to you to find more for yourself. And again, that is poem 764 in the R.W. Franklin edition of Emily Dickinson's poems, complete poems. And it begins, "My life had stood a loaded gun." You can find it, I'm sure, in many collections of her work and also online. I would say if you find a collection of Dickinson's poems which is perfectly punctuated with periods at the ends of some lines and stanzas, with commas, with rhymes perfected, without an abundance of sort of spaces with long dashes in them, either at the end of a line or sometimes in the middle, you have probably found an edition of Dickinson from one of her early editors who in many ways distorted her poems to make her conform more to the tastes of their time. Dickinson is not someone who ever conformed to the tastes of her time. We'll come back to Dickinson at some point. Thank you.